May I ask who among you is tired? Raise your hand. Alright, that's going to be a tough audience. But I'm going to tell you something. This is going to be the best lecture about guitar history you're going to ever listen to, except for hers. So I really think you should be very, very attentive to these lectures. Actually, I was very surprised that before I asked a couple of students if they knew, I don't know, could you name a couple of guitars about of the 19th century? And they couldn't even name one. So I was really, really surprised about it. So listen very carefully to this lecture and probably you'll learn something. The idea of this lecture is mainly to show the students of this project and the audience, but mainly the students, some important guitarists of Spain in the period, in one century, 1750 and 1850. Right? So I will try to tell it chronologically as a history. And I must say, before starting, that I'm not specialist in the guitar, let's say in the Spanish guitar, meaning the Spaniards. I'm not a great specialist about it. My field of research is more France. So I will start the story from France. In his second method for a six-string guitar published in Paris around 1815, a method that, as you see in the title page, was dedicated to the Russians living in St. Petersburg. The French guitarist Guillaume-Pierre Antoine Gataille included a section entitled Notes sur les différents professeurs, a remark on the different professors, obviously guitar professors. And he said, and I quote, "It has been assured to us that it is to the Spaniards that we owe the guitar. I do not contradict this opinion, but I dare to affirm that this nation is not the one that makes this instrument worth its value. In general, playing the guitar in the Spanish way is not the most pleasant way. Often, they play the instrument making noise, since they only play it by passing the thumb over the strings once and again, without care, without nuances, and without principles." This is what this man said. Gataille continued his exposition saying, "Shall we say that it is that it is in Italy that this instrument attained its perfection? Again," he said, "I will contradict this idea. Italians sacrifice the instrument to their voices. They sing in a divine way. They have too much tact in the art of music, but they do not understand that a church accompaniment does not match with the ornaments of their singing." And this is my translation. Gataille concluded this section saying that it is only in France that the instrument has all its charm, its grace, its purity, and its sensibility. Certainly, this is another example of the French chauvinism that you may know. Although he might be partially right, actually. I will not talk today about the role of the Italians, and I will let them defend themselves from these accusations. But as we see by his words, Gataille, a figure who knew very well the guitaristic sphere of his time in Paris, had a very disrespectful idea of the way the guitar was being played in Spain, assuming that in this country the guitar was mostly played using the rasgueado technique, the rasgueado technique, on several simple chords, although he does not differentiate among the mass of amateurs and those higher figures of the guitar. As little as we know about Gataille's life, we cannot ascertain to what extent he knew the use of the guitar in Spain, and if he traveled to this country to make such a statement, although he was probably acquainted with several treatises published in Spain and had contact with some Spanish figures using this instrument. Certainly the guitar had gone in France through a very refined process of a carefully designed output of music for guitar in the second half of the 18th century, something that may have encouraged him to use these words. A market mostly devoted to le beau monde, the high society of the French capital, comprising more than 250 collections of music for voice and guitar, around 30 different periodicals, and a similar number of guitar methods for this instrument, such as the one that you see in the screen. A corpus, certainly, without equal in any other country in Europe. And as we know, during the first decades of the 19th century, commonly known as the time of la guitare romane in France, this production of music for guitar reached astonishing levels, developing an impressive corpus of solo and chamber music for guitar, besides continuing the music publishing of methods and the thousands of songs for voice and guitar. But even though Gattai considered the Spanish way of playing the instrument very poor, without any taste, we could even add, he praised in his method two guitarists of Spanish origins coming to the French capital as some of the most important guitarists of his time. Firstly, a certain Vidal, a guitarist that Gattai referred as one of the most prominent guitarists of the previous generation, stating that he had a learned and bold execution. Secondly, Fernando Sor, a figure that already in 1815 Gattai listed among the virtuosos that appear these days. However, and even though Gattai only mentioned these two Spanish guitarists, certainly this country provided several important promotions or generations of guitarists between 1750 and 1850, 35 years after Gattai's method was published. But what was the role of the Spaniards in the development of the Spanish guitar between 1750 and 1850? After the time of the great guitarists of the Baroque era in Spain, such as Gaspar Sant, Lucas Luis de Riballat, Antonio de Santa Cruz, Francisco Guerao, or Santiago de Murcia, Jacinto talked about them in Germany. Figures that created a relevant repertoire for this instrument at the end of the 17th century and the early 18th century, we see a decrease in the publishing of music for this instrument, not only in Spain, but in all Europe. According to James Tyler, you may know his book, The Guitar and Music, and its music, which is kind of the reference nowadays. The only music published for guitar in Spain between 1700 and 1750 is Murcia's Resumen de acompañar la parte con la guitarra, which appeared in 1714, although several other manuscripts have been found containing Spanish music for guitar that can be dated during the reign of Philip V. Yet very little is known about the role of the guitar in the first half of the 18th century, especially after the death of the Queen Maria Luisa Gabriela de Saboya in 1714, and to whom Murcia, Santiago de Murcia, was allegedly, supposedly giving guitar lessons to this queen. According to Ricardo Aleixo, a Portuguese scholar that has also done a PhD dissertation on the guitar in Madrid in this period, the guitar was, and I quote, the predilect instrument of the lower classes in Spain during the second half of the 18th century, and it was often used by the high society, appearing in the private sphere, events in the open air, in theater, and in theater performances. I highly recommend you the book of Aleixo entitled La Guitarra en Madrid, which was published actually in 2016. Aleixo refers to three aspects of the guitar at that time. Firstly, the guitar as a popular instrument, among the lower classes being used to accompany all kinds of songs, relying on a few chords to play contradanzas or fandangos, using mostly the so-called rasgueado style to which Gattai referred. This image that we see, it is called the Fight of the Majos, a very particular social strata of the Spanish society at that time. Secondly, Aleixo refers to the guitar as an academic instrument, with several guitarists of the time beginning to create a repertoire devoted to those amateurs who wanted to attain a higher level of performance using a punteado style, which is not the rasgueado style, obviously. what made necessary for them to know the rudiments, the basics of the solfeggio, the music theory. This comprised several methods for guitar and some compositions for this instrument, especially at the end of the century. We shall refer to them later. And lastly, the guitar, Alexo's point of view, he refers to the guitar as an instrument used at the court, reflecting an interest for the customs of the low social classes by aristocrats. This is Maria Walpole, Countess of Waldegrave, later Duchess of Gloucester in England, actually. So as we see, this instrument was somehow sportive. And what is interesting about this instrument is that it has 6 courses, because this is how it was in Spain from about 1760, 1765. Where this instrument kept its formula, 6 courses until the last decade of the century, and a little bit on the early of the 19th century. This certainly provided a wider range for the instrument, maybe inspired by the old vihuela which shared this feature, although it may have been devised as a tool to improve the rasgueado technique as well. Well, the history of the Spanish guitar in Spain during the second half of the 18th century does not seem to have encountered very relevant guitarists, living in this country until the very end of the century. Usually the first figure to mention is Pablo Minguet y Irol, who published in Madrid in 1752 his Reglas y Advertencias for all the instruments that you see in the guitar, among them the guitar, obviously. A method that, allow me to say, contains one of the very first references to guitar music in staff notation, in music notation, not in tablet. Another author was Andrés de Soto, who published De Arte para Aprender con Facilidad. It's Art to Learn with Facility, also published in Madrid 8 years later, in 1760, although it seems that he copied other authors of the past. Another figure is Juan Antonio Vargas y Guzmán, who authored his Explicación para tocar la guitarra de punteado, an Spanish guitarist who wrote this method in Cádiz in 1773, and who published it also in Veracruz, in Mexico, 3 years later. In particular, the music by Vargas y Guzmán is quite interesting, and we are going to listen a very little extract of his sonata, just for you to see that at first what Gataye said, it was not the reality. But anyway. It is at the end of the century that we find advertisement of music for this instrument, and finally authors that have a more academic view of the music of the guitar. We can mention mainly Fernando Ferrandiere, who published his Arte de tocar la guitarra, Art of playing the guitar, also in Madrid in 1799, and who it is said to have composed 6 concerts for the guitar. 6 concerts, like the one that Caroli you're playing. Although none of those concerts have been found. Actually, what you see in the screen is the second edition, which was published in 1816. Other authors such as Juan de Arespacochaga, Manuel Ferrao, Isidro de la Porta are figures that developed their art at the very end of the century living in Spain. You can find an early approach to their study in the book of Luis Brizo de Montiano, which is a very important scholar in Spain, with his book Un fondo desconocido de música para guitarra, an unknown archive of music for guitar, published in 1995. In 1799 also appeared two guitar methods by foreigners, actually. This is the case of Antonio Abreu, a Portuguese guitarist who went to Spain and developed his art there, and who published a method in collaboration with, actually it was an organist, Víctor Prieto, entitled Escuela para tocar con perfección la guitarra de 5 y 6 órdenes, School to play with perfection the guitar of 5 and 6 courses, published in Salamanca. And also Federico Moretti, who came to Spain also in 1794, an Italian guitarist who published his Principios para tocar la guitarra, Principles to play the guitar of 6 courses, also in Madrid in 1799, after settling in the capital of Spain. And actually another figure that seems to have been very relevant in the development of the guitar is the enigmatic figure of Padre Basilio, known as Miguel Garcia, or Miguel Garcia, known as Padre Basilio. A guitarist important enough for Boccherini to dedicate his fandango in the manner of Padre Basilio. And that, according to the great Spanish guitarist Dionisio Aguado, was his teacher. Although several advertisements of his music have been found in the Spanish press, very little of his music has been found to estimate the quality of his works. Alright, the history of the guitar has neglected, or this is my point of view, until recently, two very important Spanish figures that left abroad. The first one is a certain Vidal, who in 1785 was said that was advertised in a publication in Paris known Tablette de renommée des musiciens. It's like famous artists of the time. A publication listing musicians active in Paris as one of the most famous and most skillful guitar masters in Europe, who wrote music, and I quote, in a learned style worthy of the execution of the greatest masters. Vidal was a guitarist of Spanish origins that arrived in the French capital no later than 1769, and where he stayed until his death in 1803, more than 30 years. Without any doubt, Vidal was the most prolific guitarist in Paris during this period, composing 4 methods for the instrument, publishing several periodicals for voice and guitar, an important number of collections for voice and guitar and violin and guitar. And among his well-known contribution was his Les Soirées Espagnoles. It's like the Spanish evening. It was a weekly periodical that was in the market between 1776 and 1783, or circa 1783. Or his Journal de Guitare, published between 1786 and 1798, being interrupted in several occasions. And he's actually the first person recorded to have published music for Spanish guitar in England. This is actually the title page of his composition, his collection. If by any chance you would like to learn a little bit more about this guitarist, I wrote an article last year entitled The Famous Vidal, trying to give him the credit he deserved. The famous Vidal relied on the life and works of a guitarist in late 18th century France, published in a journal entitled 18th Century Music in Cambridge. According to several sources, Vidal, excuse me, I have to do something. Stop music. According to several sources, Vidal was praised as particularly distinguished for his rare talent for difficulty, meaning that he really enjoyed doing difficult music. this is very particular because at that time, as you said, music supposedly for the guitar was not difficult. And for ladies, this is not, let's say, a lady's work. And several guitarists of his time referred to him as the foremost master of the guitar of the time. Yes, an Spaniard. In particular, the French guitarist Antoine de Baillet referred to him as the famous Spanish artist, revealing his origins. You see here an example of his music, which in an allegro tempo does not seem a piece of cake, from my point of view. His most important contribution is the Concerto pour la concert pour la guitare avec accompagnement de deux violons alto et basse, concerto for the guitar, with accompaniment of two violins, viola and cello, published in Paris in 1793, the very first concerto of the history of the guitar. Yes, an Spaniard. We are going to listen an extract of the first movement performed by Stanley Yates, who sent to me privately this recording. Actually, he uploaded it already in the internet, so you can listen to it. This is the concerto. We are going to listen to the first page only. Interesting enough. Another guitarist born in Spain was Salvador Teodoro. Actually, I discovered the second name of this guitarist, and I actually discovered when he was born and where he died, which was in London. Deserves to be in the history books as one of the foremost guitarists or Spanish figures of this instrument in the early 19th century. Arrived in Paris around 1801, and some publishing music for this instrument, Castro is referred as being asked by the highest society of Paris, having had illustrious students. With an output of at least 19 opus numbers, he also published a very interesting method for the guitar in around 1810, that deals specifically with modulations on the guitar. One of his most important contributions is his Journal de Musique Étrangère, journal of foreign music for the guitar, Lire, that's another story, published in 1809, a collection issued bi-weekly that contained 3 pieces per issue, a Spanish song, an Italian song, and an instrumental piece. Castro moved to England sometime between or around 1829, because in France at that time, let's say the guitaromanie started to decline, mostly in the 30s, and most probably, or almost for sure, with his son Mariano, to whom in turn would have an important role in the development of the Spanish guitar in England. Since we are running out of time, we were going to listen a little extract, but we are going not to do it. So we'll start right away with Fernando Sor, and I will tell very little about him. But this is very interesting, and for all of you, this is probably the most part of the most interesting part of the history of the guitar itself, I would say. When in 1844, the Belgian musicologist Joseph-François Fétis referred to Fernando Sor in his entry of the Biographie universelle des musiciens, it's like universal biography of musician, he stated that the guitar music of this composer, of Fernando Sor, had little success because of his habit of composing almost always in 4 parts, what made it very difficult for the amateurs. In a similar vein, meaning almost in the same way, Francesco Molino, one of the foremost guitar figures of the Paris scene during the first half of the 19th century, actually the picture you saw, it's from Francesco Molino's book. Molino affirmed that we see that the music by Messier Sor has so much harmony that we may think that it is music composed for the forte piano, or the pianoforte. The Catalan-born guitarist and composer Fernando Sor, yes, Catalan, is undoubtedly the guitarist of the first half of the 19th century who has received most musicological attention in recent years, being considered one of the greatest guitar composers of all time. Even though he tried to achieve a career as an opera composer, which he failed, it is his guitar music that is considered his most important legacy, called the Beethoven of the guitar. It's so beautiful, the Beethoven of the guitar, by his student. I don't know, David, what will you call me in the future? His production by his student Napoleon Coste. His production for music for this instrument comprised more than 60 opuses, highlighting fantasies, sonatas, variation, duets for 2 guitars, and a wide variety of studies for the instrument. I'm sure you all have played some of his music, even though you don't remember the name of this composer. One of the most important works is his Méthode pour la guitare, method for the guitar, published in 1830. In the words of Eric Steinstable, one of the most, let's say, renowned musicologists in the field of Sor, with its over 80 pages of text and 50 pages of illustrations and musical examples, this is one of the most detailed guitar tutors of the period, guitar methods of the period. It is quite different from the majority of concurrent methods in that instead of the standard selection of progressive pieces, the music samples invariably concern specific technical or musical problems discussed in the text. The book is an invaluable source of information on source ideas, on technique, fingerings, and finger impressing. We are going to listen a very, very short extract of his music where you're going to see these 4 parts and even 5 parts. So that I chose this extract because in a way it reminds me to Beethoven, and also you see the different voices. Anyway, give me a sec. voices at the same time. Even though it looks easy, it's really not. And also the key is very, very not guitarist. Another guitarist, I'm almost finished, but it's 5 minutes more. Another of the Spanish guitarists that marked the history of the classical guitar was Dionisio Aguado, considered as a virtuoso of the instrument. Actually, in his method, Fernando Sor addressed to the reader who wishes to improve her détaché skill, meaning the way he plays scales. So, Fernando Sor addressed the student to Dionisio Aguado, who, I quote, excelling in this kind of execution is in position to provide the most considered and best studied rules on the subject. Certainly, Aguado devoted most of his thoughts to the evolution of guitar technique and performance, and consequently, he published several important guitar methods. The very first one is his Colección de Estudios, collection of studies, where he shows the germ and the different models of what will be the technical conception of Aguado, which was really, in a way, different to what was at that time. Aguado continued his ambition to live his vision of the instrument in other subsequent methods, among others the Escuela de Guitarra, published in 1825, and then published in France, his Nouvelle Méthode, published in 1835, or his Nuevo Método para Guitarra, published in 1843. Of particular interest for the history of the guitar is his La guitare fixée sur les tripolissons, ou fixateur, where he presented an artifact to hold the guitar, trying to obtain as much as freedom as possible of the two hands. However, and even though Aguado is mostly known by his legacy as a pedagogue of the instrument, he also composed several important works that deserve to be among the best guitar pieces ever composed, such as his Trois Rondeaux Brillants, Brilliant Rondeaux, or his Fandango Variant. We are running out of time. So, several generations of guitarists born after 1789, the year of the French Revolution, and active during the first half of the 19th century, continued the tradition of the Spanish school. Some important figures are Miguel Carnicer, a student of Aguado, or Felix Ponzoa y Cebrián, who supposedly gave guitar lessons to Tárrega himself. Although probably the most important figure was Trinidad Huerta, a man who called himself in the stage, I am the Paganini of the guitar, the Beethoven of the guitar, the Paganini of the guitar, and who maintained a brilliant concert life throughout the world during the second quarter of the 18th century, performing in France, in England, Malta, Egypt, USA, Canada, Cuba, or Israel, among other countries, and probably being the first guitarist having such an international career. And after him, obviously, other generation of Spanish guitarists carried the tradition to the times we live today, highlighting figures such as Julián Arcas, Francisco Tárrega, or Andrés Segovia, and Ignacio will be in charge of talking about these people in Bergamo. Although that's another story. My dear Antoine, yes, I know France, Notre Dame, the Louvre. I'm sure that if you were alive today, you would change your words and would appreciate how much the Spanish guitarists and the Spanish tradition of playing the guitar have done for our precious instrument. History changed, my friends. But if wherever you are you still think the same, burn in hell. Thank you very much.